We help a lot of our clients prepare for a return back to Canada after living in the United States for 10, 20, up to 30 years sometimes. Here are four things that I would do right now if I was planning on moving back to Canada. Hello, my name is Brian Haggard. I'm a certified financial planner, chartered financial analyst, and I'm the founder of Retirement and Financial. We help simplify your cross-border retirement plan. And for a lot of people, that retirement plan is moving back to Canada. A lot of people have moved here when they were 30, 40, 50 years old, is what they thought might be a short-term trip down here to the US or a short-term work assignment has now turned into a long-term career. And now they're planning on moving back to Canada in retirement. Today, we're going to talk about four things that you may want to consider doing if you're planning on moving back to Canada at some point. The first thing that I would be looking at doing if I was planning on even thinking at some point I might be moving back to Canada is I'd want to start taking advantage of my Roth accounts. Now, one of the negatives of moving back to Canada, or maybe I should say one of the positives of being in the US, is that typically here in the US, your taxes are going to be much lower than what you're going to face in Canada. And what we see a lot of people do, what we see a lot of people make a mistake with is make contributions to their pre-tax 401k or pre-tax IRA just to defer those taxes here in the US when taxes are typically lower, and then move to Canada and withdraw those accounts at much higher taxes. That just doesn't make any sense. So one of the things that I would do if I was thinking I might move back to Canada is I'd want to take advantage of my Roth accounts. This means if I'm working, contributing to Roth 401ks, Roth IRAs if I'm able to. If I was retired, I'd really be looking at doing Roth conversions before moving back to Canada. I had one client that was moving from the US in which he was going to pay 15 to 20% on taxes to Nova Scotia, in which he was going to pay closer to 40 to 50% in taxes. And for somebody like him, we were doing $200,000, $300,000 a year in Roth conversions so that he could move all of that money up to Canada completely tax free. If you're thinking about moving back to Canada at some point, you may want to consider Roth conversion. The second thing that I would be looking at doing if I was going to return to Canada at some point is if I don't already have it, if I didn't already have it, I would be looking at getting my US citizenship. Now, why is that? Now, there are some drawbacks of having your US citizenship. For example, if you are going to move back to Canada and become a resident there, you're going to have to start filing US taxes again, and that is a little bit of a downfall. However, I'm starting to believe that some of the positives of getting your US citizenship will override those downfalls. And the biggest one is there's a current bill out there that would eliminate US Social Security benefits for non-US citizens and non-US residents. And that would apply if you worked in the US, maybe you only had your green card or even a visa, to give those up and then move to Canada, you might have a $2,000, $3,000 a month Social Security benefit that I would hate to lose or hate to see you lose if you weren't a US citizen. Now, I don't believe this bill would pass, but as we get closer and closer to Social Security potentially being in trouble or being in trouble, they may the politicians may be looking at more ways to eliminate Social Security for certain groups, and that may include non-US citizens and non-US residents. If I was not a US citizen already and I was planning on leaving Canada or leaving the United States, I would really strongly consider getting my US citizenship. The third thing that I would be looking at doing if I was leaving the United States is start to consolidate my US accounts. There's a good chance if you've been in the US for 10, 20, 30 years, you may have a lot of accounts in different places. You might have IRAs, you might have multiple 401ks, You might have Roth accounts, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks. Stuff just tends to add up a bit. And before I wanted to leave the United States, I definitely want to consolidate these accounts and make it as easy as possible. For me, I try to have one IRA and one Roth IRA. And being married, try to have my wife have one IRA and one Roth IRA. And that's about it. Because one of the issues about leaving the United States is sometimes custodians, companies, don't even allow you to keep your accounts as a Canadian resident. Other custodians don't allow you to trade your account as a Canadian resident. So I'd want to make sure that my accounts were easily all in one place. I would want to know that that company that I'm dealing with would allow me to place trades and take withdrawals out of those accounts. And I want to get those accounts allocated properly before leaving the United States. The other thing that I'd want to make sure that I was doing if I was leaving the United States is file the appropriate tax paperwork with my custodian to make sure that I have the proper tax withholding done as a Canadian resident. If you don't do that on time, if you're not doing that in a timely manner, it's possible that you can lose out on some of the US and Canada totalization and benefits that you qualify for. And the last but not least thing that I would be doing if I was planning on leaving the United States and returning to Canada is I'd want to create an exit strategy. First and foremost, I'd want a strategy for when I was going to leave. Am I going to leave in January, April, June? What time of year am I going to return back to Canada? That's one of the big questions that we ask all of our clients because there can be some large tax benefits of moving back to Canada at the beginning of the year. That would give us a whole nother year to potentially do Roth conversions before moving back to Canada. I'd want to have a tax strategy. I'd want to know when am I going to give up my green card if I have to? Am I going to give it up in the border when I cross the border, or am I going to give it up by mailing it in once I'm actually a Canadian resident permanently? And I'd really strongly consider talking to a tax expert because when you're leaving the US and returning to Canada, there's a good chance that you're going to have two, three, four tax returns that you're going to have to do in that year in which you leave Canada. One for you, one for your spouse here in the US, and a good chance for one for you and your spouse in Canada as well. So I'd want to make sure I'd have a good tax person lined up so I'm prepared for that move back to Canada. Again, thanks for listening today. My name is Brian Haggard. I'm a certified financial planner, chartered financial analyst. We help simplify your cross-border retirement plan. If you're considering moving back to Canada, I'd consider reaching out to us so we can create a cross-border retirement plan for you and make sure you're getting all the benefits that you qualify for in both the US and Canada. Thank you.